What happens when absolute power meets unbridled malice, and the divine hand itself seems to descend for retribution? We often hear the name Jezebel and instantly conjure images of wickedness, manipulation, and a life utterly consumed by depravity. Her name has become synonymous with evil, a byword for a woman who defied every moral and spiritual boundary. But what if I told you that the common understanding of her demise, the dramatic fall from a window, barely scratches the surface of the true horror, the meticulous orchestration, and the chilling fulfillment of ancient prophecy that marked her final moments? Her end wasn't just violent, it was a grotesque, public spectacle, a preordained consequence that forces us to confront the raw, terrifying power of divine justice. Tonight, we peel back the layers of centuries of misconception, to reveal the true horror, the true finality of Jezebel's last stand, and uncover the hidden details that make her death a uniquely engineered consequence, a warning echoing through the corridors of time. Get ready to witness a fate so profound, it will change everything you thought you knew about one of history's most infamous queens. Imagine a world steeped in ancient ritual and rigid societal roles, where a woman, not born to Israel, but imported from a land of sun-baked stone and strange gods, would rise to wield power so absolute, so corrupt, that she would leave an indelible stain on the very fabric of a nation. This was Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, the king of Sidon, a Phoenician priest-king who himself likely served as a high priest of Baal. She grew up in a culture where deities like Baal and Asherah, gods of fertility and storms, were worshipped with fervent, often brutal, rituals. Her world was one of opulence, political intrigue, and a polytheistic worldview utterly alien to the monotheism practiced in Israel. When she was offered in marriage to Ahab, the king of Israel, it wasn't a union born of love, but a calculated political alliance. Phoenicia was a powerful maritime trading nation, Israel, a land bridge. This marriage was meant to solidify economic and political ties, a common practice in the ancient Near East. But little did Israel know, they were importing not just a foreign queen, but a spiritual plague. Jezebel arrived in Samaria, the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel, not as a gentle, assimilating bride, but as a conqueror of culture and faith. Her devotion to Baal was not merely personal, it was zealous, uncompromising, and aggressive. She didn't just practice her religion, she sought to establish it as the dominant faith of Israel, displacing the worship of Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This wasn't just a clash of religions, it was a direct assault on the very identity of Israel, a nation founded on a covenant with one God. Your mind can barely process the audacity of a foreign queen walking into a nation founded on divine law and seeking to utterly dismantle its spiritual foundations. She persuaded Ahab, a king already described as doing more evil in the sight of the Lord than all who were before him, to build a temple for Baal in Samaria, even setting up an Asherah pole. And it wasn't just a temple, she brought with her 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah, who ate at her royal table. This wasn't merely tolerance, this was state-sponsored idolatry, an institutionalized spiritual subversion of unprecedented scale. Now, you might be wondering, how could a king allow such a profound betrayal of his people's heritage? Ahab, for all his power, was a weak man, easily swayed by Jezebel's stronger will. He was captivated by her foreign allure, her ruthless ambition, and perhaps even intimidated by her relentless determination. She wasn't just his queen, she was the architect of his reign's spiritual downfall. This is where the story takes a dark turn, where the initial tension between faith escalates into open spiritual warfare. Jezebel didn't just tolerate Baal worship, she actively persecuted the prophets of Yahweh. The historical accounts tell us she cut off, or slew, the Lord's prophets, a systematic purge designed to silence any opposition to her pagan agenda. Imagine the fear, the desperation of those who clung to their ancestral faith, hunted down and murdered for their beliefs. This systematic oppression triggered an immense wave of moral outrage among the faithful, a simmering resentment that would eventually boil over. But here's the shocking truth historians discovered, hidden within the biblical narrative, Jezebel's persecution was not just an act of religious zealotry, it was a calculated move to consolidate power. By eliminating the spiritual leadership of Yahweh, she removed a major voice of dissent and a challenge to her absolute authority. She was dismantling the moral compass of the nation, making it easier for Ahab and herself to rule without divine restraint. This power grab, cloaked in religious fervor, created a deep, festering wound in the heart of Israel. And then came the prophet Elijah, a wild, uncompromising figure, emerging from the wilderness to directly confront Jezebel's reign of terror. Their clash was epic, culminating in the dramatic showdown on Mount Carmel. It was a divine test, Baal versus Yahweh, played out before a desperate nation. The spectacular defeat of Baal's prophets, consumed by divine fire, should have been a turning point. It certainly solidified the faith of many Israelites. But for Jezebel, it only fueled her unbridled rage. When she heard what happened on Mount Carmel, her response was not repentance or fear, but a visceral, unholy fury. She sent a messenger to Elijah, promising to make his life like the lives of her slaughtered prophets by the next day. This wasn't just a threat, it was a psychological declaration of war against the very voice of Yahweh. She was untouchable, or so she believed. This particular detail of her personal, direct threat against Elijah, immediately after the humiliating defeat of her 450 Baal prophets, reveals the depth of her vindictiveness and her supreme confidence in her own power, a confidence that blinded her to the consequences that lay ahead. It also showcases her pattern of behavior. When challenged, she didn't retreat, she attacked with renewed ferocity. This pattern would ultimately lead to her undoing. But her most infamous act, the one that truly sealed her horrific fate, was yet to come. It was the chilling tale of Naboth's vineyard. Let me tell you what witnesses actually saw, or rather, what was orchestrated to appear as a just legal process, but was in fact a heinous crime of convenience. King Ahab coveted Naboth's vineyard, which was next to his palace in Jezreel. Naboth refused to sell it, citing ancestral law. Land was inherited and not to be sold outside the family. Ahab was dejected. But Jezebel, observing her husband's childish sulking, scoffed at his weakness. "Are you not king over Israel?" she scorned. "Get up and eat. Don't worry. I will get you Naboth's vineyard." This chilling declaration reveals her complete disregard for law, for tradition, and for human life. She took matters into her own hands, demonstrating her capacity for calculated evil. She wrote letters in Ahab's name, sealed with his signet ring, and sent them to the elders and nobles of Naboth's city. The instructions were horrifyingly simple: declare a fast, seat Naboth in a prominent place, then suborn 2 scoundrels, 2 men of Belial, to falsely accuse him of cursing God and the king. The prescribed punishment for such a crime? Stoning to death. And so, it was done. The elders, either complicit out of fear or corruption, followed her instructions. Naboth was publicly accused, condemned by false witnesses, and dragged outside the city walls to be stoned to death. His sons, too, were likely killed, to ensure no heir remained to claim the vineyard. The details of this betrayal of justice are crucial. It wasn't a sudden fit of rage, it was a meticulously planned judicial murder, leveraging the very legal system against an innocent man. This act ignited an unprecedented level of moral outrage, a deep wound in the soul of the nation, not just because Naboth was killed, but because the very foundation of justice had been perverted by the highest authority. The vineyard was then seized by the king, an act of plunder justified by a lie. This is the part that changes everything about how we see this death, because this act of unbridled tyranny drew the direct, undeniable wrath of God. Immediately after Naboth's murder, Elijah the prophet was sent to confront Ahab, who was already in Naboth's freshly acquired vineyard, ready to take possession. Elijah delivered a terrifying prophecy directly from Yahweh. "In the place where dogs licked up Naboth's blood, dogs will lick up your blood, yes, yours." And for Jezebel, the prophecy was even more specific, more chilling: "The dogs shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel." This wasn't a vague curse, it was a detailed, gruesome pronouncement of her exact fate, a direct consequence for her wickedness and her role in Naboth's unjust death. The specificity of the prophecy, the location, the instrument of her demise, dogs, the utter lack of a proper burial, highlights the depth of divine indignation. It was a public declaration that her acts of injustice would be met with an equally public, and profoundly humiliating, judgment. This prophecy lingered in the air for years, an open loop hanging over the wicked queen, a ticking clock of divine retribution. Ahab, hearing this prophecy, humbled himself, and because of his temporary repentance, the full extent of the judgment against his house was delayed, falling instead primarily on his descendants. But Jezebel, she never repented. She continued in her idolatry and manipulation, even after Ahab's death in battle, a fate intertwined with his own disobedience, though not directly related to Naboth's vineyard in its immediate execution. Her sons, Ahaziah and then Joram, also known as Jehoram, inherited the throne, and Jezebel, though no longer queen regent, continued to exert immense influence as the queen mother. She was a persistent, corrosive presence, ensuring the continued worship of Baal and Asherah in Israel, her spiritual poison lingering over the land. Her grip on power was remarkable, a testament to her ruthless will. The moral decay continued, the land groaned under the weight of her enduring influence, and the people yearned for deliverance from the spiritual darkness she had imposed. Now, decades after the prophecy against her was first uttered, the stage was set for its chilling fulfillment. A new instrument of divine judgment was raised up, Jehu, a fierce military commander, chosen and anointed by a prophet of Elisha, Elijah's successor, specifically to execute divine wrath upon the house of Ahab and, most importantly, upon Jezebel. This anointing was shrouded in secrecy and urgency, a dramatic call to action from the very heavens. Jehu was given a direct command from God to annihilate Ahab's entire lineage and, with particular emphasis, to bring Jezebel to justice. This wasn't a personal vendetta for Jehu, it was a sacred mission, a divinely ordained coup. He was known for his furious driving, a man of decisive action, perfectly suited for the task of swift, uncompromising judgment. The news of his anointing and his rapid march towards Jezreel, where King Joram and Jezebel resided, sent ripples of fear and anticipation throughout the kingdom. The tension built with every mile Jehu's chariot covered. Messengers were sent out to intercept him, only to be turned back, or worse, joined to his cause. The watchman on the tower in Jezreel reported seeing a furious chariot approaching, recognizing Jehu's distinct driving style. King Joram, wounded from a previous battle, and King Ahaziah of Judah, Joram's nephew, also descended from Ahab through his mother, rode out to meet him, asking, "Is it peace, Jehu?" Jehu's response was a chilling declaration of intent, "What peace, so long as the harlotries of your mother Jezebel and her many sorceries continue?" This was no diplomatic visit, this was the arrival of judgment. King Joram turned to flee, shouting treason. But Jehu drew his bow with full strength and shot Joram in the back, the arrow piercing his heart. His body fell in Naboth's vineyard, the very vineyard Jezebel had seized through murder. The irony, the horrifying poetic justice, could not have been lost on anyone who witnessed it. This marked the beginning of the purging of Ahab's house, and the net was closing in on Jezebel. With Joram dead, Jehu entered Jezreel. But here's the unexpected detail, the truly bizarre psychological maneuver Jezebel attempted in her final moments. She heard of Jehu's arrival, the murder of her son, the collapse of her dynasty. Yet, instead of fleeing, or begging for mercy, or even showing fear, she chose defiance. She adorned herself, painted her eyes with kohl, and arranged her hair. Some scholars suggest she was preparing herself as a queen to meet her conqueror, perhaps to exert a final psychological influence, relying on her regal bearing. Others argue she was arraying herself as a seductress, a harlot, in a final desperate attempt to charm or intimidate. This act of self-adornment, in the face of certain death, reveals a mind so steeped in pride and self-importance that it could not conceive of a truly humiliating end. She believed she could still control the narrative, still command respect, even from the man sent to execute her. Her arrogance, her utter refusal to acknowledge her impending doom, is a profound psychological study in itself. She stood at the window of the palace, looking down as Jehu entered the gate. Her final words, delivered with a mix of scorn and perhaps a last-ditch effort to rattle him, were a chilling taunt, "Is it peace, Zimri, you murderer of your master?" She invoked the name of Zimri, a short-lived king who had assassinated his predecessor and then committed suicide. It was a cutting accusation, trying to brand Jehu as a mere usurper, a fleeting tyrant destined for the same ignominious end. But Jehu was no Zimri. He was an instrument of divine justice, unswayed by her taunts. He looked up at the window, not engaging in a war of words, but cutting straight to the chase, demanding action. He cried out, "Who is on my side? Who?" This was a direct challenge to her loyalists, to those who served her within the palace. He knew her power was built on fear and loyalty, and he sought to exploit any cracks in that facade. This is the moment when her absolute power crumbled, when the illusion of her control shattered into a million pieces. And then came the shocking betrayal, the pattern interrupt that sealed her fate. 2 or 3 eunuchs, who had served Jezebel for years, perhaps decades, looked out at Jade. Their decision, at that precise moment, was the ultimate act of self-preservation. They had witnessed her tyranny, suffered under her capricious rule, or perhaps simply saw the writing on the wall. They answered Jehu's call. "Throw her down." Jehu commanded. Without hesitation, these very men, who had waited on her, perhaps even adorned her, seized Queen Jezebel. Can you imagine the scene? The sudden grasp, the terror in her eyes as she realized her absolute power was gone, replaced by the crushing reality of betrayal. They threw her from the window. The fall must have been brutal, a sickening descent from the heights of royalty to the dusty ground below. She landed with a sickening thud, her blood splattering on the wall and on the horses that stood below. But the horror did not end there. As she lay broken, her body was immediately trampled by Jehu's horses. The very beasts that carried the instrument of her judgment contributed to her humiliation. This was not a quick, clean death. It was a violent, undignified end, a public spectacle of her absolute demise. Jehu then proceeded into the palace, seemingly unfazed by the carnage, and calmly ate and drank. Such a casual display of indifference in the face of such a horrific act is profoundly unsettling, emphasizing his role as an agent rather than a vengeful individual. After he had eaten, he remembered her. "Go now," he commanded, "see to this cursed woman and bury her, for she is a king's daughter." Even in death, there was a fleeting acknowledgement of her former status. A king's daughter, yes, but also a cursed woman. He ordered her burial, perhaps out of a lingering sense of tradition for royalty, or simply to clean up the mess. But when his men went to bury her, they made a truly horrifying discovery. This is the ultimate pattern interrupt, the moment the prophecy finds its most gruesome and precise fulfillment. They found nothing left of Jezebel except her skull, her feet, and the palms of her hands. The rest of her body had been devoured by the scavenging dogs, just as Elijah had prophesied years earlier, "The dogs shall eat Jezebel by the wall of Jezreel." The precision of this prophecy's fulfillment is chilling. Not even a full burial for the queen who built temples and ate at the royal table with hundreds of prophets. Her body, once adorned in regal finery, was reduced to a few skeletal remains, scattered and consumed. The utter indignity, the complete obliteration of her form, symbolized the eradication of her legacy of evil. It was a public, undeniable sign that divine justice had been served, precisely, horribly, and completely. This shocking discovery confirmed, beyond a shadow of a doubt, that this was no mere political assassination, no random act of violence. It was a precise, divine judgment. The dogs, the lowliest of scavengers, had consumed the flesh of the queen who thought herself above all law, all morality. It was the ultimate reversal of fortune, a complete stripping away of her pride and power. The moral outrage triggered by her life of oppression, false witness, and murder, especially the heinous act against Naboth, found its ultimate satisfaction in this gruesome retribution. Jehu, as the instrument of this judgment, continued his purge, eliminating every last vestige of Ahab's house and systematically destroying Baal worship throughout Israel. His actions, though violent, were seen as necessary to cleanse the land of the spiritual corruption Jezebel had introduced. This period of intense violence, authorized by divine command, demonstrates the biblical principle that persistent, unrepentant evil will ultimately meet its just, often brutal, consequence. The kingdom was, for a time, purged of the idols and the profound spiritual sickness that had plagued it for decades under Jezebel's oppressive influence. So, why does Jezebel's death resonate so profoundly through history? Her story is not just a historical account, it is a profound moral lesson, a chilling cautionary tale that transcends time. She remains an archetype of wickedness, manipulation, and spiritual rebellion. Her name is invoked even today to describe a woman who is perceived as morally corrupt, domineering, and seductive in a negative sense. Her life serves as a stark warning about the dangers of unchecked power, the corrosive nature of evil, and the catastrophic consequences of spiritual apostasy. She built an empire of idolatry and injustice, believing herself invincible, yet her end was one of utter humiliation and degradation. The contrast between her lavish life, her regal status, and her gruesome, unburied death is a powerful testament to the transient nature of earthly power when set against the immovable force of divine justice. Her story forces us to confront mortality's salience, the inescapable reality of our own mortality, and the ultimate accountability for our actions, regardless of our earthly status. Her death also served a critical purpose in biblical history. It marked a decisive turning point, a violent but necessary cleansing for the nation of Israel. It signified a break from the pervasive Baal worship that had infected the land under her influence. It was a vivid, undeniable demonstration that divine judgment is real, that prophecies are fulfilled, and that moral decay, when unaddressed, invites severe consequences. The justice served was absolute, and in a way, it provided a profound psychological release for those who had suffered under her tyranny. There's a certain primal satisfaction in witnessing true justice, even when it's brutal, because it reaffirms a fundamental order in the universe, a sense that right will ultimately triumph over wrong. For generations, her story has been a stark reminder that no one, no matter how powerful or ruthless, can escape the consequences of their actions when they defy divine law and inflict such profound suffering and injustice upon others. Her fate served as a chilling validation of the prophetic word, a testament to the unyielding nature of divine righteousness. Let us reflect on the profound implications of Jezebel's life and death. We often grapple with the existence of evil in the world, with the seeming triumph of injustice, and the frustration of seeing the wicked prosper. Jezebel's story, while brutal, offers a stark and uncompromising answer to that human dilemma. It reminds us that while the mills of God grind slowly, they grind exceedingly fine. Justice, in its fullest, most ultimate sense, is not always immediate by human reckoning, but it is inevitable. Her story challenges us to examine our own lives. Do we allow worldly power, personal ambition, or cultural trends to compromise our moral and spiritual convictions? Do we, like Ahab, become complicit in evil through weakness, or worse? Do we, like Jezebel, actively champion injustice and spiritual rebellion? The terror of Jezebel's end is not meant to inspire fear of a vengeful God in a capricious sense, but rather a healthy reverence for the moral order of the universe and the immutable principles of justice. Her demise underscores that true power, true authority, ultimately resides beyond earthly thrones and human machinations. It speaks to the hope, even in the darkest times, that there is a moral arc to the universe, bending towards righteousness. When we see such pervasive evil, such blatant disregard for human life and divine law, it ignites within us a deep-seated desire for justice, a righteous indignation. Jezebel's death, gruesome as it was, provides a form of psychological resolution to that outrage. It reassures us that there is an ultimate reckoning, that no act of wickedness goes unnoticed or unpunished in the grand tapestry of eternity. Her legacy is not one of heroism or sacrifice, but of a cautionary shadow, a reminder that the pursuit of power at the expense of justice and truth leads only to destruction. May we, through understanding her story, cultivate a deeper discernment to recognize the subtle, and not so subtle, influences of Jezebel-like spirits in our own time, those forces that seek to erode truth, pervert justice, and suppress spiritual liberty. May we find courage to stand for what is right, even when it is unpopular, knowing that the ultimate victory belongs to righteousness. May we learn to discern between fleeting worldly power and enduring divine truth, and may our hearts always align with justice, compassion, and the pursuit of truth, rather than the corrupting allure of domination and deceit. This chilling account of Jezebel's end stands as a permanent marker, a historical testament to the consequences of unbridled evil and the unwavering nature of divine judgment. But Jezebel's was not the only shocking death ordained by prophecy in the ancient world. The biblical accounts are rife with unexpected turns, where history's most powerful figures meet their end in ways no one could have predicted, often at the precise hand of divine intervention. Next, we delve into the cryptic prophecies and the horrifying realities behind the death of one of Israel's greatest, yet most flawed, kings, whose final moments were foretold with chilling accuracy, leaving a trail of unanswered questions and a legacy forever marked by tragedy.